Hey everyone, Chris Sawyer here. The Varietal Show is back. I am holding up a great bottle of Biale, Robert Biale Winery. If you have not been here in Napa Valley, you're missing something. This is David Natali, and it does rhyme with Biale, I know that. But the great thing here is David is the winemaker, and this is a very special winery to me. How did I get to know Biale wines, and why are they so different from a lot of the different wineries here in Napa Valley? It's because they are based on the lineage of Napa Valley, and that is Zinfandel. The grape before Cabernet became popular was Zinfandel. It came in with the gold rush, and all of these things that you've seen before, these gnarly old vines, they're mainly a lot of Zinfandel, if it's still here in Napa Valley. And they're very, very special to us. And I can say this on behalf of Robert Biale, Bob, as we all know him. There's nothing more special than Zinfandel to him. This is a winery that goes back. It was not a commercial winery in the 1940s, but they were making wine. And that is Aldo. That is Bob's dad, Aldo, was making wine when he was underaged. You heard me. He was underage. And the first wine that we're tasting right now is the Black Chicken. This is a whole story in and of itself. If you guys think about Napa Valley before the 1970s hit and the big boom on Cabernet was here, it was a lot of just farming. This is all it was there was trees that went down the middle of this whole valley, and they were orchards. And there was produce, and there was everything here. It was not all grapes. Now, that being said, there were also not very good, there were not cell phones back there. If you remember that, David.
Yeah, exactly.
We weren't born then.
No. I'm looking forward to it.
But the thing is, there's two roads, Silverado Trail, and there's Highway 29. And if you were off of those roads, the phone lines would go to the sides. But if you picked up a phone line back then, you might get your neighbors, because it was a party line. And so Aldo had a great thing. When he sold these wines underaged, he would have people call up and say they want some black chicken. Black chicken eggs, of course, but he meant the glass, or actually the bottle of wine. How did I get to know these crazy stories about this winery? It's because of ZAP, the Zinfandel Advocates and Producers. They are a great organization, and every January they are celebrating the greatness of Zinfandel in San Francisco. I love being there. I've been there since I got into this business more than 25 years ago. It is an amazing organization. David, you love that organization?
We do indeed. It raises a glass of Zinfandel every year and shines a light on the viticultural history of California, because it really is Zinfandel. A lot of the vineyards that we work with date back over 100 years, and because that was what was replanted in this area after phylloxera decimated everything. It wasn't until the 70s, as Chris mentioned, that Cabernet and Chardonnay took over this valley. But we really like to shine a light on the historical variety of Zinfandel and its prominence in California.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And I'll say one thing, Bob is not here today because he's busy going over what's happening this month and especially getting ready for ZAP and the Zinfandel experience, which is happening later this month in San Francisco. But the one thing I will say is that this Black Chicken, I was able to, I was just honored that Bob asked me to actually do the 21-year anniversary release for the nation. It was kind of during COVID times, and I'll say that it was an amazing experience to be able to, once and for all, Aldo, his father, he turned 21, and that was the wine. Once it became commercial, it was the 21-year anniversary of the commercial.
The commercial release, yeah.
Exactly.
The legal anniversary of the commercial release. So made since the 40s in an underground way, as Chris mentioned, by Aldo, delivered by hand. But really, the first commercial release came in 1999, and we've been raising the flag with the Black Chicken every year to show what Napa Valley can do with Zinfandel, and what particularly the Oak Knoll district where we're located in the southern Napa Valley does with Zinfandel. The core of this comes from the original Biale Ranch, as well as right around here in the winery in the Oak Knoll district, and the original Biale Ranch is about a mile down the road. But just a beautiful expression of Zinfandel. All the characters of Zinfandel that you want, the bright fruit, the acid drive, just the depth of flavor that makes this a really appealing wine to a lot of folks.
And there's a lot of blue fruit characteristics in here. It's almost like fresh boysenberries are bursting in your mouth, and a little bit of blueberry too. There's a lot of things going on here. This is kind of a cool climate district right here, but Napa Valley overall is a warm area. Let's not even debate about that. It is warm, especially here. This is more the Oak Knoll district. So the town of Napa is just over, like it's about a mile away where we get into the more residential area. And so this is a little bit north of downtown Napa. So easy to get to if you're in the Bay Area. And it's really one of my favorite stops. And one of the reasons for that is these vines have personalities. They are old, gnarly ones. A lot of them look like little gnomes because they've got different positioning, but some are just super stately. They like stand like this, and they have their own poise to them. And these flavors cannot be replaced in our generations. I mean, they've outlived generations of people, and that's why this tastes so good to me.
Yeah, their average age is around 50 years, 40 to 50 years in this blend. It's just flavors you can't replicate, flavors that get chosen by people year after year. If it didn't taste good, they would have thrown them out a long time ago. But these are phenomenal vines, phenomenal spots of land that we're just absolutely pleased to make into something to share with everyone every year.
So Dave, tell everyone a little bit about your background and what brought you here.
Yeah, so I have been at Biale Winery for about 5 years now. Prior to being in this role, I was assistant winemaker, and prior to that, I was a few smaller producers making Pinot and Chardonnay. But at the start of my career, I made some Zinfandel as well, and it always struck me as something that was incredibly fun to make and really pleasurable for everyone to taste. It was just this variety that brought out the happiness in people and the joy. It could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you really have to ponder and have this special meal for. It's versatile. It just opens doors with people, and it shows what California can do with just exceptional fruit and exceptional wine.
And one of the great things too that, once again, Biale and Natali, very Italian names.
Yes.
So when you think about great cuisine, I think Italian a lot of the times, especially freshness and all of these kinds of expressions in different regional places. In many ways, it's a lot like that in these vineyards. They are very different from one another. And it's also based on when they were planted. So the Historical Preservation Society that Bob helped found, it is an amazing organization that really preserves these spots. There's a big story about Bob's mom and how the whole thing started, where they wanted there was a real estate agent that really wanted to buy their property, but mom wouldn't give in until she got that land across the street, and that's where the vineyards were. And it was to preserve those vineyards, and I think that really that heritage is so alive right now, and it's a really important thing to think about. Zinfandel, there's under 4 million cases of Zinfandel made. There's mega cases of Cabernet made, but there's not much Zinfandel. It's been replaced in some places, but when you're preserving these things, because they were not being pulled out after 40 years like a lot of the Cabernet is, they get better at 40 years. And that's why they're so important to preserve them. And I think that's a really important thing. This is the Dickerson.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that spot.
Yeah, so St. Helena, so on West Zinfandel Lane, so on an appropriately named street, but this is the last remaining Old Vine Zinfandel vineyard on that street with
It's called Zinfandel Lane, you guys.
Exactly. It should be a no-brainer, but it's planted in 1920. Joel Peterson at Once and Future, and formerly at Ravenswood, made this for a number of years and was kind enough to bring us into the project and into the vineyard. So this is the 2022 Dickerson Vineyard, and it's on the western side of the valley. It's just in this perfect sweet zone of really well drained soils. It's exceptional for old vine. It just has this spice that I think is hard to find in a younger vineyard. It's really something that comes out with age and with time.
Yeah, this is a spot, as he said, as Dave said, right there west of, it's on the west side, pretty much what we call the Rutherford Bench, which goes from all the way from down here and goes all the way up to St. Helena. It passes Rutherford, but it was called the Rutherford Bench a long time ago. And it's really between Rutherford and St. Helena on the west side. So that's off of Highway 29. And you'll find actually a very nice selection there. We're going to taste the next one, which is Morosoli. That is not that far.
Not at all.
It is actually very close. And it's a very interesting part where it's facing east. And so it gets the warm sun. And when you think about the heritage of this whole valley and the first winery that was started in 1861, Charles Krug, it's very close to Charles Krug too. But Charles was a very smart guy. He went where the sun was, and it's also one of the fattest parts of the whole valley. Remember, there's two mountains. On the east side, it's the Vaca Mountains, and on this side, which is the west side, it's the Mayacamas. And so when you really look at that, it was a very smart idea to go there. And so these old pioneers started planting grapes that were facing east, because that's where the sun would break in the mornings. And then actually, instead of getting too hot in the late afternoon, it would actually be shaded in the late afternoon versus Howell Mountain, which gets the sun in the late afternoons. So this is a very special thing. It preserves the acidity.
Yeah.
How is that such an important thing?
Well, I think that the acidity is what drives, I think, a wine's longevity. I think incorrectly, Zinfandel sometimes get panned for not being able to age well, and I think that's completely incorrect. It's just a wonderful age-worthy wine, and because of that natural acidity that we get, particularly from these really well-selected sites and preserved sites, that it just adds it drives the fruit in your mouth, but it also drives the length of the wine in your cellar if you're patient enough to actually hold on to these bottles, because they're delicious to drink right away. It's sometimes a labor of love to hold on to these things for 5-10 years.
There's something in this wine about the texture. It's a lovely, lovely texture. It's soft, it's smooth, it's elegant, it's sophisticated. It's not super oaky, you guys, and it's only 14.6% alcohol, which in the old days, I must say, for Zinfandel, it was a little bit higher. I think that we've all learned a lot. The clusters of Zinfandel are very interesting. If you look at a cluster, especially from these old ones, the middle of it is perfect. The top is getting a little pruny, and the bottom might not even have reached veraison, which means it's not even necessarily all a red yet or turning black. And so there's a lot of things that are going on there. I think in the old days, a lot of people would pick it when it was completely ripe. And I think now the natural acidity is such a bigger key. And the other thing is, when you're making these wines, you don't want to stand in the way of these flavors with oak.
Exactly. We really are. We try to take a very deft hand with these wines, and we, as Chris mentioned, the cluster morphology of Zinfandel is so extreme in parts. And what we do in the cellar here is really try to capture some of those lesser ripe berries for that acid, and those really ripe and juicy berries, those perfectly ripe berries.
Juicy.
But then the stuff that gets a little raisiny, because Zinfandel is a thinner skinned variety, there's going to be naturally a little bit of sun that dries out some of these clusters. We have some equipment in the cellar that works to minimize that. So we really capture the core of each of these clusters and make a wine that I think, we can pick a old field blend and get a variety of flavors from just a single cluster.
A variety of flavors from Zinfandel, the great variety of California. Zinfandel is the official California state grape, and it's because of really what happened back at in the gold rush days. I mean, it came in there. There are other grapes, obviously, that came after that, especially in the 1890s when Petit Syrah came in. And you work with a lot of Petit Syrah. We could talk all we want about the PS I Love You organization, which we love them too.
Exactly.
Petit Syrah, I love you. But, you know, there's something really interesting about these old vineyards, how they had certain things. You'll find a lot of what we call the mixed blacks, where they have certain parts that are like, maybe it's just a few rows, or maybe it's a whole section that's Petit Syrah that was blended in. We didn't have all these little tanks and all these kinds of things. Life was different back then.
It was different. It was a more simplistic thought about winemaking. It was just, you pick the entire field, and the field happened to have built into it kind of the blend, which I think in some of these old wine vineyards is the character. It's you get a little bit of Petit Syrah, you get a little bit of Carignan, you get a little bit of Alicante. All of these things that can kind of help elevate the ultimate blend.
This is the Morosoli that we were just talking about. I love Chris Morosoli. His family has had this vineyard for more than 100 years, actually. It goes back to the turn of last century. And it's a really interesting thing that the family has preserved this. People got to know this a little bit through BV, Biale Vineyards, and actually they have really good Cabernet on that property too, but they've also preserved the history. And it's a really important thing. There was a tasting that we did, a blind tasting with Jeff Cohen and Joel Peterson and other people that came to this. I think Bob was there actually. And the fact was that we did it blind, and I brought in all these old bottles from the 90s of this, and Chris Morosoli was there, and unbelievably so, it won the blind tasting, and we're like, oh man, that stuff's great. I think that was Elise that that they made a designate from that. But it's a really important thing. Like, we talk about sourcing fruit. You know, Biale does not own all these vineyards, but they have great relationships with the people that do. And that's a really key thing to this, is about, it's working with each other. It's a huge community thing, and that's why Zinfandel and the Zinfandel Advocates and Producers, which is ZAP, and you can look them up at zinfandel.org and find out all about the Zinfandel experience, which Dave and I will be at for sure, and Bob will be there. But I think that's the whole thing. It's a community. You know, it's preserving these old vines. It's preserving this kind of flavors that no one can reproduce in our lifetimes. They were planted by people other than us. They were planted by not only like our grandparents, but people before our grandparents in some cases.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's amazing.
It's a testament to the longevity of some of these vines and the perseverance of the families that farm them. And that's what we work with like-minded growers like the Morosolis. That, you know, this is prime Rutherford dust dirt. It is prime Cabernet land, and yet we can find this beautiful island of Zinfandel in that sea of Cabernet that makes exceptional wine year in, year out, and unique to the soil. As Chris mentioned, it's very close in proximity to our previous wine, the Dickerson, but a completely different flavor profile, just based on a couple miles down the road.
These are very exciting wines. This has a little bit more black fruit. It's dense, it's round, but there's a little chewiness to it. It's on a hillside as well. Is there a little bit of a diff? What do you find is the difference between the Dickerson and the Morosoli?
I think there's a bit of a slightly bigger structural component from the Rutherford soils on the Morosoli. Not a huge one, but it's just a slight fine-grained tannin. And in Rutherford Dust Society, it is that Rutherford Dust tannin profile. And it's hard to not say that it's there. I think that just gives a life to this wine and a unique character to this wine.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that these vines were even there before the Morosolis planted this. At least some of them. And that's just an amazing thing about the heritage of Zinfandel in California. And, you know, I love it when, foreign winemakers come here and they're like, oh, Chris, do you have any Zinfandel? Because they don't know it in Europe. I mean, we know that Primitivo is is its ancestor, and it's actually the same DNA, but its actual heritage really comes from Croatia, and we know that because of the great Carol Meredith and the study she did in the year 2000 that linked this directly to a mother clone in Croatia. And so we know that the heritage was in Europe, but it's been a mystery until 2000. And Carol did a great job in finding that. That's why the Historic Preservation Society is such a big deal to me and to everyone that loves Zinfandel. And I think if you really start tasting the Zinfandel of today, you'll go, wow, this is stuff like, maybe I just wasn't drinking the right Zinfandel. I think that there's a lot of things. I think that Biale, Ridge, and a number of the other great wineries that helped found ZAP really have helped set the new precedents for quality and standards because of their respect for these old vines. And you can't stand in the way of the old vines.
No.
I mean, they are just their own beings.
Yeah, we make at Robert Biale 15 different Zinfandels. If we took the approach that it was our hand that had to show in all these wines, we would have 15 of the same wines. But
Boring.
It's not what we're trying to do. We want to shine a light on these old vineyards. We want to raise the profile of these historic vineyards, to keep them in the ground and keep producing lovely wine that we can share with everyone.
Well, cheers to that.
Cheers.
Hey, it's been great hanging out with you, Dave. I look forward to seeing you at the ZAP event in January, and every time we meet up.
Absolutely.
This is a great destination here. You can look it up at Robert Biale on the internet and just find it. It's very easy to get to. It is a very great ambassador. This brand is a great ambassador for the greatness of Zinfandel. And we love it, and I hope you guys learned something from this show. Cheers!
Cheers!